I think they're going to come out in a group, but I'll introduce them one by one. We got Pete Devlin. He's the Marine GEOINT officer. We also have Major General George Franz and Lieutenant General Bob Otto, as well as Lieutenant General Jack Shanahan. Here they come. Gentlemen. Good to see you.
Nice
How
to
are
see
you?
you.
I'm Jim. Very nice to meet you, General Franz. General Otto, thanks for coming. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hi, I'm Lynn, Wright.
Hi, how are you?
Nice to meet you.
I might just go ladies first, from left to right.
Sit down.
She's the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, Lynn Wright, to the far left. And again, the topic is going to be PED, but we have Lieutenant General Jack Shanahan to her right, and we have Lieutenant General Bob Otto right in the middle there, George Franz, and then Pete Devlin, the Marine GEOINT officer, right next to me on stage. So the format for this one is we're going to give each of you a chance for a few minutes to put into context what you do while we're here, and then we'll dive into questions. So I might, again, give you the privilege, Lynn, to go first.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the invitation to come here and speak to you about Navy PED and what we're doing in the Navy. And it's actually, while I appreciate going first, the reality is that the Navy is building off of the great work that was done by the Air Force and the Army over the last 15 years. And so just want to talk a little bit about that. The Navy has been involved in the PED, the Joint PED architecture over the last 15 years or so, but we've been doing it as individuals, individual augmentees, either down at down in Langley, down at Fort Gordon, in theater in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Horn of Africa. And the Navy has a history of distributed PED. You know, we are alone and unafraid on our ships, and we like to do everything ourselves. But taking the lessons from the Army and the Air Force over the last 15 years is the recognition that you need to be distributed as well as have a very strong centralized capability. And that's what we're trying to build at the Office of Naval Intelligence. So what we're trying to build at the Office of Naval Intelligence is very similar to what's going on and being run by Colonel Hinsdale down in Fort Gordon and down at Langley, is a multi-int PED facility that can take care of Navy PED requirements, which are going to be building over the next 5 years or so as we bring on our own platforms. But it also has enough capacity to be a part of the Joint PED architecture. This idea that we can share capacity as requirements, tactical and operational requirements arise over the next several years. A couple of things, since we're here at GEOINT, I want to sort of highlight things that the Navy is doing. I think in terms of certification, the Navy is bought into GEOINT certification. We have about 190 of our PEDsters are fully qualified, GEOINT qualified, but this gets back to the centralization issue. Pretty much the only place we've been able to achieve certification has been at ONI and at some of the larger fleet concentration areas where you have the expertise to do the on-the-job training. We need to figure out a way to get certification out to our fleet elements out at sea. And the other issue, which is a traditional issue for me, I've been bringing up in the Joint PED GOFO discussions, is the importance of collection management. Collection management is not stacking as much Preds and Reapers over a target as you possibly can. It's about being smart about linking national technical means to theater capabilities, to tactical capabilities, and ensuring that you have just enough overlap to provide that multi-int picture, but not to essentially waste a lot of ISRs on one target. And that is an effort where we're working with USDI, and we have about 16 Navy collection managers who are fully certified in accordance to the USDI standards. and that is we're at the beginning stages. Those numbers are not very impressive, but we are going to work towards a future where we have a good cadre of GEOINT certified PEDsters who can work all joint requirements, and we have certified collection managers who can work both at the fleet concentration areas, at the numbered fleets, and also in the joint collection shops. So I think I'll leave it there.
General Jack Shanahan, you're up next.
Okay, thank you, and good morning to everybody, and thanks for allowing us to do this. And I thought about, but ultimately decided against wearing my pink socks this morning, Robert. So, two Air Force uniforms side by side, but I'm here to represent the Office of Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Warfighter Support. So you'll get some overarching comments from the USDI side. And to really set the stage, and at least in terms of this panel, the term PED is somewhat a term of convenience to ensure a common lexicon as we sit up here and talk across all the services. And we're using it a little bit more narrowly defined than usual, referring to the processing, exploitation, dissemination, and analytic work performed by DoD forces in support of combatant command and joint task force requirements. And in terms of the temporal dimension, we are talking about PED largely in the context of meeting near-term intelligence needs for ongoing operations across the entire spectrum of conflict, not the deeper and more time-consuming all-source analytic work that normally is performed or associated with the national intelligence community. That's a blanket statement, and I don't mean it to be quite that way, because if you talk to Lynn and you talk about acoustic intelligence or ACINT, that is not short-term work, very complex work, very long-term work. But for the terms of what we're talking about today, it's mostly those sort of short-term phase 0, phase 1 PED requirements. And finally, when we talk about PED, we are referring to all those capabilities, platforms, and sensors in every domain. It is not confined exclusively to airborne ISR, though that is admittedly where we all started as we got this Joint PED Working Group and the Joint PED Summit off the ground. As everybody in this room who's been associated with GEOINT or any other intelligence discipline is already very well aware, we are facing a major disconnect between the volume of collection and our ability to derive meaningful intelligence from that collection. The rapidly expanding, persistent demand for ISR has resulted in an explosion, and there's no better term for it, an explosion, a growth in airborne, ground, maritime, overhead, and cyber platforms and sensors designed to operate in every domain from subsurface to space. And in some cases, what we've actually seen is PED has become the limiting factor. Not very often, but we're at that point now. And this is only going to get worse, because we're entering that world that we all saw coming, in which every platform and every person is a sensor. We are overwhelmed by the data. So it really is a multifaceted problem requiring multifaceted solutions. But we're working a number of initiatives at the OSD and at the service levels to go after it. But for today's panels, we're really just concentrating on one facet of that, which is the Joint PED Enterprise. I had one slide, and if they put that slide up here, I don't know if they have it, but I believe we got it down here. And I'll just talk a little bit about this and quickly about the history. We had this early understanding and appreciation that we needed an enterprise approach to Joint PED. And what we started with is we targeted interoperability standards. The goal was to avoid parochialism and avoid those proprietary architecture, standards, and tactics, techniques, and procedures. And it was accompanied by this growing recognition that we must be interoperable enough to share the workload, to increase capacity, efficiency, continuity, and eventually federation where and when it makes sense. We did that, though, with a full understanding and appreciation of differences across the service, and there are substantial differences across the service. If I could emphasize one thing more than any other, this was a grassroots voluntary effort from the bottom up combined with top-down direction. And it was started several years ago between INSCOM commander and the Air Force ISR agency. Major General Eugene Hazy worked with Terry Mitchell from the Army, then General Otto down at the Air Force ISR agency, worked very closely with Steve Fogarty at INSCOM. Then I worked with General George Franz, sitting on the panel up here with us, and so on down the line. So the continuity of thought, the continuity of concept has been instrumental to making this succeed. This idea of top-down direction, but really a bottom-up grassroots voluntary coalition of the willing. It is now exploded, as you can see on the screen, to include all the services, the combat support agencies, the joint staff, Joint Functional Component Commander for ISR, JFIC ISR, the combatant commands, and now even partner nations. My role as USDI Warfighter Support is to be the co-lead of this as a permanent co-lead or co-chair of this joint PED summit, of which there are working groups below that, with each of the services and SOCOM serving as a rotating co-chair, which is a very convenient arrangement. The key to success has been open and willing collaboration. Just that is what has allowed this to get to the point where it is today. It is the key to success. And though we are now technically charters, you see the bullet on the slide, the Memorandum of Understanding only recognizes our collective agreement with the vision and gives some structure to our collaboration. It is not ever meant to be overly prescriptive. In fact, when we meet at the GEOINT or DICES level, it's only, we'll get briefings and updates on the things the working group has done. We're only deciding on the most contentious issues that could not be resolved at the lowest possible level. The vision, as you see on the slide, any source, best PED, any customer. That's a simple vision, and that has driven us from day one as we started this. The initial focus was indeed on GEOINT. Agreeing upon and training to an FMD production standard was the very first project we took on, very successfully. So we looked at Special Operations Command as sort of having that term of gold standard because of the special requirements that they drive with their FMB and a GEOINT. We're moving on to moving target indicators or MTI, and then looking at SIGINT next, and also some kind of enablers like human language technologies, which is very important to PED. In terms of the way ahead, as you see on the slide, Lynn talked about collection management. We have to go after collection management. If you've worked in the business for any amount of time, you know this is a perennial topic of concern and contention about how do we get collection management right. In this term, in the case of what this panel is doing is looking at collection management and putting it together with PED. Bringing in the partners nations. With the last joint PED summit we did have the Five Eyes and some additional partners. Really as observers to begin the process, but more and more to bring them into the loop. Some have been a little concerned about bringing in the partners before we've solved all of our joint issues, but I'm a fan of as early as possible bringing in those partner nations. We will not operate ever again in the absence of some sort of coalition, whether it's bilateral, multilateral, or 27 different countries. And then we're addressing C2 a little bit separately. We're talking about it in the summit, but that adds a layer of complexity, especially when you talk about how do you federate PED. That's working very closely with the Joint Staff J2, the Joint Staff J3, and the JIFIC ISR, because it involves all of those in terms of the allocations, platform sensors, and now PED. And so the only thing I'll say is before I turn over the microphone to General Otto here, is if I could ask you to walk away with one thought, one significance of the visual up here, it's this, it's the visual. It's the fact that you have OSD, USDI, and the services represented together. SOCOM is up here in spirit because they've been very closely integrated in everything we've did. Right. 5 years ago, you would not have had this up here. There's just no question we've come a great distance because of the grassroots effort, but also the ability of these leaders that shown up here and our predecessors, and I'll tell you, our successors that figure out how to make this work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
General Shanahan, thank you. General Otto.
Yeah, and the neat thing is we actually like each other, which was a surprise. You know, we started on it 5 years ago. There was no meat on the bone, and it has just grown, as Jack said, from a grassroots basis, which I think is really the power behind what we're trying to accomplish here. I want to start out by giving you a sense of the scope, at least from an Air Force perspective, of what we're dealing with. So, when we talk processing, exploitation, and dissemination, it's of what, and the of what is it's high altitude and medium altitude ISR, but really from a joint perspective, most of what we talk about is medium altitude. MQ-1s and 9s for the Air Force. We have 60 caps that are flying around the globe today, from Afghanistan to Iraq to Syria to Yemen to Niger, really, and around the globe. And so that is a huge, huge enterprise. We have something like 7,000 airmen invested in what we call our distributed common ground system, which I would describe as regionally focused, globally networked, immediate warfighter support. And so these airmen are at locations around the world. So we have 5 active duty core sites, we have 8 major Air National Guard sites, but we also have distributed mission sites that do that integrate the signals intelligence. All told, if we look at a total force, active duty reservist guardsmen, there are 22 different DCGS sites. We have them in Germany, we have it in Korea, we have it in Hawaii, and we also have coalition participation with the United Kingdom in participating as well. And so this is a non-trivial thing, you know, and each day, if you look at just one of our major sites, there would be 200 airmen, 150 of them would be doing operations. There would be 9 to 10 terabytes of data that they would be processing in one day, over 139 to 140 of their servers. So just think of that from an IT perspective, what is involved in this. And they're focused on things from targeting of high-value individuals to determining where we could have helicopter landing zones, to doing targeting development and producing graphics for a variety of purposes. And so when we came together initially with the Army, and it's grown since then, you know, the question is, how can we do this in a way that's going to best meet warfighter needs, and can we back each other up? And so what we've been focused on in the Air Force is how can we agree on common data standards and tradecraft, and also promote analytic innovation and tool interoperability, and then along with that have outreach to the other services that are on the stage here, outreach to coalition partners, because the reality is the Air Force, despite having 7,000 airmen involved in this, we are at capacity and we are stressed. We've been measuring the stress clinically since 2010. We measured again in 2011, 2012, the latest instantiation in 2015. Just the measured psychological stress on the airmen doing this, it's one of our most stressed areas in the Air Force. And you've all heard the story of how stressed our remotely piloted airplane pilots are, and these are the people doing the back end of that. So what we see in Joint PED is the opportunity to collaborate and take best of breed ideas, and through that, hopefully get at some of the capacity and stress problems. One of the ways we're doing that is by redesigning the architecture that these 7,000 airmen use, and we're going to an open architecture and agile methodologies to boot. And so, you know, I use the iPhone example. How many of you, I don't know how many of you have smartphones out there? Show up some hands. I think it's most of us now, right? How many of us would wait 7 years to get the next phone? But when we do block releases to modernize our distributed ground system, it was taking us up to 7 years to do that. And we realized that it just is not going to keep pace with the kinds of innovations we've seen, the technological developments, and the needs of the airmen that are doing the exploitation. And so we've gone to agile methodologies. We've just rolled out the first instantiation of a framework, and this is not the full enchilada by any means, but it's certainly the basis and the backbone upon which we're going to build the future of DGS. And the reason that's important, and the reason you all should care about that, is because with this open systems, the ease of integration from an industry standpoint is just going to be, levels of effort better than what we've seen in the past. And so we think that enables us to ingest new tools, whether that tool comes from Lynn in the Navy, or whether it comes from George in the Army, or whether it's something from industry that it's the first seen within the government that we can all harness. And we need to be able to do that on the timing and tempo as adversaries adjust and get that to our exploiters. And so we believe that this is going to be something neat. We're trying to do this fast, and so we had a Plugfest Plus this last summer, which was a competition for not for the major companies, but for smaller companies. And the goal was to get the winning company, you know, anyone that wanted to enter the competition could. The idea was we are trying to do automatic downgrade of imagery from, say, U.S. only to, you know, various coalition partners, and to get that on contract within 60 days. We didn't quite achieve the 60-day goal. We learned some things in that, but we were inside of 90 days. And now we plan to field that capability in this current year. And we're going to do 2 more of these competitions in this current year. So that's the sort of idea of innovation where we think we can bring tools to market, tools to the exploiters very quickly, and will be important for us as we move forward. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is when we talk PED, we normally talk PE, and we leave off the D. And how do we disseminate that? How do we get that down to what I call the first tactical mile? Because sometimes what the people at the first tactical mile need is exquisite exploitation. They need to know exactly what is the height from this level to that window, because if they bring a 7-foot ladder and they needed a 10-foot ladder, they have a bad night, right? And so sometimes they need exquisite, and we can do that with these common standards in Joint PED. But sometimes they just need better situational awareness, and we should be able to deliver that to the customers. And I've got my innovations guys working on something that we call ATTACK. It's an Android tactical. Think of it as an application on an Android phone that's going to provide some of that situational awareness directly to the first tactical mile. And then as we envision the future, it's, well, that works great for us, but what about people that aren't familiar with English? So imagine combining that with human language translator and delivering it in a number of languages from a coalition partner perspective, right? And how can we better harness coalition efforts? So that capability will not only have rich in data, moving map, the ability to do FMV streaming, but this dissemination portion of it, I think, is going to be really important as we move forward. And then we're also working to expand to our coalition partners. I mentioned the United Kingdom. Right now we have, as we speak, the United Kingdom is doing exploitation on 2 lines of full motion video. And it might be there too, because they have MQ-9s. It might be US MQ-9s. It depends on the needs, right? And if they have a holiday and it doesn't work for them, to be working that day, we can cover that from Langley, Virginia, or Beale in California. And so it's this sort of partnering. The Australians are interested in that kind of a partnership, and we're moving towards that we see as important in harnessing the capability. And we've done the same thing with the Army at Fort Gordon. So our vision is that we'll be able to do this in Joint PED. We open this also up to the Five Eyes community, and everything is at that level. But also we'd have the ability to add partners as necessary as we move forward. That's hard to do within the current construct, so we've launched what we call EPI, which is the European Partner Integration Enterprise. And right now, Italy and the Netherlands are sitting here. France is looking to fill a permanent position. The United States is involved in that. So if you think of North Africa, where there's common interests, that is another way to look at how we can do joint or combined PED. And so at the end of the day, I think it's important that for Joint PED, for success, we all need to agree on the standards and the end states, but we need to allow service flexibility for the differences in our missions, and we have to be willing to compromise sometimes on the direction that we would have been going as an Air Force, but in order to have the tent be big enough to include other services or coalition partners, we have to be willing to vary, those plans. And I'll stop with that. Thank you.
General Otto, thank you. General Franz, next up.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. Thanks. I'm here today representing Lieutenant General Bob Ashley, who would like to be here. So he deputized me as the CG of INSCOM to come out and talk a little bit about what the Army is doing in enterprise. And first, I would say it's really the partnership, and it's not just that we like each other, which we do. We get along well, but we've been fighting together for 15 years, and we're continuing. As you heard from the previous speaker, we still have a fight going on. So when we talk about Warfighter from an Army perspective, and our chiefs have been pretty clear, that is the soft team, the platoon, the fire base. It's making that brigade combat team and their subordinate units capable with every advantage we can bring them, of which this is a process. And so, very focused on the fighting edge. And I'd also count in the warfighter definition the commanders who are actually conducting the ISR mission. And so you talked in your introduction about the amount of complexity that goes behind conducting these intelligence operations. I will tell you, there's probably no busier commander on the earth than Colonel Prescott Ferris, who was forward as the commander of our aviation task force in Afghanistan. And so he's responsible for thousands of hours of mid-level aerial ISR, direct fire. And he's also, as the forward supported commander in Afghanistan, supported by the Army PED Center, Colonel Adam Hinsdale, and a coalition of the willing at the PED Center in Fort Gordon, who were doing 95+% of the exploitation of those forward aircraft. And so I count our intel commanders who are actually conducting those ISR operations as part of that warfighter definition, and we, obviously we owe them every capability we can get them. Another piece to frame, and I know the focus of this discussion here is on PED, but when we look at an ISR operation, we always take into account, this is something that the PED Forum has also come up with, we look at all 4 components of a mission. It is the mission command. There's got to be a supported commander and then a commander, many times an intelligence commander responsible for delivering that capability to that supported maneuver commander. The collection component, so it's the asset, the collection management, the piece that Lynn talked about, that's a component. You've got to have the PED, and again, we, the Army, have been guilty in the past, although we've learned a great deal from our Air Force Navy counterparts that you have to include PED in the operation and the planning and the capacity build and the task organization, because without PED, then again, you don't have an effective mission. And on top of all of that, if you don't have the underlying architecture that allows you to do all of those functions seamlessly, jointly, coalition, and at the scale and pace that your supported commander needs, then again, you don't have a successful ISR operation. And so our commanders in the Army look at all 4 components, of which PED is obviously a critical and essential element of that. How we're going to get after that in the Army, again, today we're employing the Distributed Common Ground System. Army DCIGS-A is the backbone framework that we use at Fort Gordon at the Army PED Center. We use it in Afghanistan. We use it at our major subordinate maneuver sites, core sites. We operate off of Army DCIGS. And we do the mission management, the mission command, the collection management, and the exploitation is done off a fairly new program. So we've instantiated a fixed site DCIGS, which is now part of the program, which allows us to work the home station mission command and support. And that is then enabling us to tie into the maneuver systems, DCIGS systems that are with our maneuver forces at core and below. And just as General Otto said, our movement forward is open framework, fully compatible, open architecture to the extent we can maximize commercial industry to do that. And I'll be happy to pass any D6 questions you have for me to General Ashley to answer later. I think collectively, task organization, again, we're focused on geospatial intelligence support from national to tactical. So it's not just a joint effort. We're very dependent and integrated with our national partners at NGA all the way down through in coalition. Again, our focus is on the geospatial intelligence cells at the brigade level, division, corps level. We have our integrated geospatial division at Fort Gordon. And so today, the center of gravity, the main effort, is really our Army PED node that we're putting in at Fort Gordon. And that will tie in our mid-range, our aerial ISR, our national to tactical means. It's multi-in, so it's not just geospatial intelligence, it's signals intelligence. It is also some of the cyberspace operations. The centerpiece for INSCOM and the Army fixed site is at Fort Gordon. However, we are in the process now of extending those production exploitation dissemination, those nodes out to our major core installations, Fort Hood, Fort Bragg, and Fort Lewis, where we now have expeditionary MI units that also have PED capability, and we'll extend that forward into the battle space, again, down to the brigade combat team level with the production. As General Otto said, you need just the right type of product at the pointy edge in just the right fashion. And so as we look at how we push products down to that maneuver battalion or that company, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We have to be very conscious at the level we're doing the PED, at the theater level, but how we push those products down to the supported commander, which again may be a company commander, an SF team commander, a brigade combat team commander. One of the tools that we have been working on, again, working closely with NGA, working with the services, is our Geospatial Enterprise TPED Services tool, GETS. Again, it's application. It's an open framework tool that we use for collection management, production management. We're tying it in with the NGA systems. We see that as an application that will allow us to synchronize across not just the Army units, but across all of the services. What are our biggest challenges? They're the same challenges that you heard about. It's scale, volume, it's data, it's architecture, it's getting the information to the commander, the maneuver commander on the ground in the type and form that he needs it with the precision that he needs it all the time. And that's a 24-hour day, 7-day a week. It's the systems component of that. Again, we think that the cooperation and the learning we have done in our work with SOCOM, with the Air Force, with the Marines and Navy, that coalition of the willing, frankly, has been one of the most effective governing bodies that I've experienced in my 32 years. But that's because we let colonels and lieutenant colonels, major civilians, we let the operators get together and solve problems, again, with just enough governance to make sure it's that prudent risk. You know, the left and right limits are fairly clear, but within some pretty broad left and right limits, we've let those commanders who actually asked to execute the D6 mission or the PED mission solve problems and then pass problems back to us that, frankly, if they have to be solved at the policy or programmatic level, those are the kind of things they hand us at the governing body, and that has been a great, just a great, successful effort on that part. I think in terms of the best opportunities where we really could use the most help, or where I think we have the greatest opportunity for partnership, is that it's starting with the PED Center, but it's that joint interoperability, it's the open framework. It's, again, making sure that as eyesight develops and the national community ultimately determines the framework, that as services, we plug into that efficiently, but then we can laterally support one another with PED, with products, so it's both the horizontal and the lateral integration that we're going to have to do. It's the best practices, and again, so we're on board with the NGA, the certification, the training standards, professionalism of the GEOINT force. We think just as in SIGINT and in some of the other disciplines, that's going to be valuable for the Army and for our soldiers and civilians. So again, it's that common professional standard that we agree we've got to have at the tactical level if that's where it's required, and that's where we'll get it. And then finally, our training program. So we have an Army program called Foundry, which is our training. It's a national to tactical training program. We instantiate that out to about 42 sites. And that's where we bring in all of the capabilities, national capabilities, certification standards, and training on a platform, again, that's run by the Army G2 and by INSCOM, that will allow us to get that certification and work those interoperability pieces, again, at the battalion, at the brigade, at the company, and corps level. So with that, I'll pass it over to Pete.
Last up, Peter Devlin.
Right.
Marine GEOINT officer.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in typical Marine fashion, we're either going to be first or going to be last. So we're much like what Ms. Wright described, where the Navy is. We're very close to having our PED Center IOC. Proportionately, we've made a major investment at MCI Quantico to be able to do that. And we look with a mixture of admiration and envy on what the other services are doing, even the Navy. We do find it a bit galling that the Brits are now doing 2 lines of PED, and, well, we're not quite there yet. So, but we're very close, very close. But as we get closer, we also have to look to see really what is this doing to our Marine Corps ISR enterprise, and in this context, our GEOINT ConOps. And has profound ramifications, really, because we haven't been in this as long as the Air Force and the Army and now the Navy. So right now, this has been something that was done just very locally. We haven't gone back. We haven't done anything second phase. We haven't looked at various phenomenologies. It's been very much, as you see it, FMV. So as we consider the changes to our ConOps, and before I forget, I'll have to also put a plug in for GETS, like General Franz did too. That's one of the tools we use heavily, and we really, really like GETS. That's one of the main benefits in the collaboration we've had, particularly with the Army down at Fort Gordon. And General Otto, also, thank you for calling it the first tactical mile, because that also bothers us a little bit. We're the last tactical mile, when that's usually where the battle's taking place. But back to our ConOp, when we looked at this deeply and we saw what this would do to MCI Quantico, we start looking even further afield too, because we have to consider the entire range of military operations. It's just not what we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan, Somalia, other places, of course. So really, what happens now with the other data feeds that are available to us, and by that I'm talking about the microsat swarm that's coming increasingly available, that's up in orbit right now, and there are some pretty ambitious plans to put more up there. As you all know, they come in various shapes and sizes. The products are all totally different. The data feeds are totally different. So how do we make best use of that for the Marine Corps? Because within ROMO, at one end of the spectrum is, well, you have no ISR because the enemy has a vote and maybe they don't fly, or they don't fly well, or being jammed if they can fly. So now we're going to be reliant on other sources of information to prosecute the fight. And in particular, that's going to be microsats. That provides us a level of persistence not as good. It's not going to give us usually the exquisite collection we need, like General Otto said. I don't think a microsat's really going to be able to tell us whether we need a 7-foot or a 10-foot ladder, maybe just that we need a ladder. So That's a huge challenge, though, because right now, of course, NGA has the commercial GEOINT accelerator as they're exploring how to leverage all this data that's coming in. But there's going to be new tools that we're going to require that are going to enable us to extract the best information out of that. Are we going to do that ourselves, or is that what the commercial GEOINT provider is going to do for us? Well, we don't know yet, but we're going to partner with the other services and with NGA, and we're going to find out how we do that. Also, what do you do with your very expensive PED centers of excellence when there's really not a lot of ISR that's flying around? I think the DGS system is robust enough that they can exploit all kinds of information, but as we look at what ours is going to be, we have to consider what other sources of data we're going to bring in. And just like General Franz said, too, particularly about training, and Ms. Wright talked about certification, we also now have to be able to train our GEOINT analysts so they're capable of exploiting all this data. So I think LiDAR in particular is no longer going to be a niche area. That's going to be something that's going to be robustly exploited in the future as more comes in. And then for ourselves, even the RQ-21A, the upgrades that we have for the Blackjack are going to have more and varied sensors on there. And we're also looking at what we can do with the Osprey, because that's a very capable platform that can contain an awful lot of sensors. So not only will we be engaged in the Joint PED effort, but we're also going to have our own organic requirements that are going to require more expansive exploitation capabilities. And then it brings us to the last question, really. I know I can't even solve the first two, but so the last one is, well, it gets back to the age-old question again. Where is the best place to do fusion? I mean, we've been talking about this for 30 years, really, since there was an option. So are we going to do fusion back in the rear where we have all this exquisite data coming into once we figure out how to make best use of it? Or is this, does it get pushed forward to the first tactical mile out there? We really don't know yet. So we've got extraordinary systems like Kill Switch that we're using out there that can make good use of this. But it all depends on the architecture that is in the hands of the people in the first tactical mile. Really, what can they do with it? And even if you can get it to them, do they have the time and intention to really do anything with it? Or do they want you to do it back in the rear and you just have to know exactly what it is that they need forward and send that to them because that's all they have time to ingest, or that's all that your circuit will allow you to do. So big questions for us. Sometimes it is advantageous coming last to an issue. But that's what we're wrestling with right now in the Marine Corps. And again, we're very grateful to our service partners, particularly the folks down at Fort Gordon Langley, for helping the Marines who are deployed down there to learn how to do PED of ISR in the best way possible.
Thanks very much to all of you. Let me also thank you for educating me on the correct pronunciation of this acronym, because when I started, I was thinking PED, and I was like, well, what do performance-enhancing drugs have to do with this? But I'm sure they could play a role, but I just have to figure that out. Acronyms are always the password for real access to the military. A lot of topics here. We got 20 minutes, a little over 20 minutes. What I might ask, just in terms of format, when I throw a topic out, maybe one or two of you respond. Listen, if everybody wants to respond, that's great. But if you don't have something that you're really itching to say, then we can move on to the next topic to squeeze a few in before we're wrapped up. The first I would ask about is just technological change and how that affects your mission. I mean, I always find sometimes buried in your bios are the most interesting details. But General Otto, you were a U-2 pilot, in the past, so a relatively old tool. Maybe I could start with you, just how this not migration, but just expansion of capabilities. You talk about the microsat swarm, how that has affected the PED mission. More tools, but I also imagine creates this kind of noise problem as well.
No, it has, and the variety of products that are available has grown expansively. But I think the biggest thing with technology has been we have limited the impact of our workforce because the supporting infrastructure has not been able to harness technology as well as we should. And so we're moving in years instead of in weeks. Yeah. And we know we get a D- for that. And we need to do better. So we're focused on how we can do that better in the future. It's exciting. When I look at what I would call a revolution, a pending revolution in geospatial intelligence, really from microsats and the commercial space, you know, it's like it, I love it, I want more of it, and I think that's how our PEDsters feel, and it will be a very rich source. And the challenge is, how do we harness it?
Anybody else want to pipe in?
I think that
Lynn?
I'll just jump on that real quick. It's this is an issue that we have in the Navy because, as Jack pointed out, the Navy deals with a wide variety of types of data, ACINT data dealing with submarine movements, electronic information dealing with the movements of vessels and things of that nature. And the willingness to let the machine do the correlation for you, and then you focus on where you bring value. So this is the machine-human teaming that Secretary Wark talks about, right? The issue is that people, intelligence officers in the Navy, and so I'm telling on my own guys, do love to build tracks, do love to sort of handle each bit of data and lovingly take care of it. You know, the reality is that the volume and velocity issue is that they need to get past that. They let the machine do that, and then they need to focus on the meaning of that, right? So I'm extremely excited about what the future can bring, both what can come from the commercial world in terms of multi-int correlation, and then allowing that to go forward, and then us focus on the really hard problems that the humans can deal with.
This is related, and this is from the audience related question because it gets to the personnel. Are you getting different sailors, airmen, and soldiers than 10 years ago in light of that change in mission? I might put you on the spot, General Franz, just because you spoke about how you get the Army in this generation to do this new mission.
So I think, you know, the soldiers we're getting are different, but they reflect the demographic worth, you know, that we have today, which is, you know, yes, everybody have a smartphone. They're much more technically savvy, so comfortable with the technology, and much more demanding when the system we deliver, when they know there's something better out there on the commercial side, and they know. And so they're the ones who are really driving, and that's, again, why the bottom-up innovation of this work group at the commander level, it's really the analysts who know what they want the technology and the tool to do for them. They know what the capability is out there to do it. They're really driving the process from a tool development technology. So, you know, we have soldiers who are much more tech-savvy, and frankly, harnessing their energy and driving it towards getting them the systems we need has been probably one of the biggest changes. They just understand how to apply the technology intuitively in ways again, I'm not going to think of, people on this stage aren't going to think of the things that our soldiers think of.
That's encouraging. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd add, I think there's opportunity for those in the commercial space here for training. And the way that we have trained the previous generations is not the way that the current crop of recruits is used to being trained. And we put them to sleep in the first hour of their training, and they stay asleep for the 6 weeks of their basic training. And so we understand that, and we understand that we need to deliver training much differently now than what we have in the past. We're starting to do some of that in the Air Force. We've been working with applications on an iPad. It doesn't have to be an iPad, but that's where we started, so that the trainees can flip through and learn some of this foundational stuff in exciting ways, to include games. And what we found is the outcomes from that are very positive. But the people up here are used to, let's do another PowerPoint briefing. And it just doesn't resonate. And so when we talk about retaining talent, we've got to look at things differently. No more can we stand, oh, this will be a 4-day training course, when really what they're used to, you know, they've never read the instructions for an application on their phone. Why can't we engineer the tools that they use in such a way that there's no training required? And so I think that's achievable. I just don't think it's been a high enough priority in our sites.
Another question from the audience. You all use UAVs. Should there be one UAV requirement service to minimize costs?
Let me take that on, at least from the OSD seat. The answer I would give to that is no. Diversity matters. Now, monopolies are bad. but diversity is very important. And I see a world, and we know we're getting close to this. The people in this audience, you all intrinsically know this, beyond a shadow of a doubt. We can have small, what we in the past would call organic. Organic is not a four-letter word, and should never be a four-letter word in the future. Why? Because the data is going to get to the right place for somebody else to do something with it. I can promise you that an Air Force requirements for the Air Component Commander are going to be a little bit different at times from somebody down at the brigade combat team level. That's okay. It's what really matters is what happens to the data and who gets access to it and who's able to do something with it. This idea of national tactical integration has come a long way in the past, I'd say, 5 years. Equally important, and we're making a lot of strides on this, but we have a long way to go, is the other way around. Tactical to national integration. Somebody at NSA wants the data collected off a U-2 that's out there flying a mission on behalf of the Pacific Command Commander, a Title 10 operational mission. And normally in the past, that data, well, that's an air component thing. We don't really need to get that. No, it should go there because the world we're walking into of big data, ABI, activity-based intelligence, object-based production, you'll be able to do something with that data. And vice versa, of course, we want the national take that's going to add this incredible rich context to what we're doing out there. The challenge is how do we put it together? And unfortunately, as we talked about a little bit this morning with eyesight, we're in a place where we still have a lot of work to do to make those architectures interoperable. Even clouds have to be interoperable. It sounds easy, but it's not that easy. So I do believe there's great value in diversity of assets. What really matters is no longer the hardware, it's the package that goes on. It's the sensor package, and how quickly can I move one package out and put another package on? I need a LiDAR today. Swap it in, swap it out. Just give me a way to get that data out to the right person, do the processing, analysis, deep analysis, and then move it on. So I think we are in danger of being too monopolized in some of these areas. It's about the data less than it is about the platform, and I'll let anybody else pick that.
Yeah,
You want to pipe in?
And I would agree. To follow on with General Shanahan, it's really, we have very savvy combat arms commanders now. They're all very experienced, unlike the experienced General Schwartzfield I've had, where it just wasn't there. Our battalion, our brigade, our division corps commanders, they have all fought and have been supported by aerial ISR. They see it as part of their combined arms fight to do both the ISR, the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and then reconnaissance and security. And the Army is also teaming UASs with our manned aircraft. So it's the manned-unmanned teaming for reconnaissance and security in the D fight, particularly as we look, if you look a little bit beyond the current fight, Afghanistan, Iraq, and COIN into the kind of the hybrid threats. We are going to require, ground component commander is going to require that combined arms air-ground team at the tactical, very tactical level with direct support. Again, they're also very appreciative and savvy about, they don't need to own all the assets, nor do they care to. They just want to know that what they need to maneuver is available directly to them, and that again, the commanders now are comfortable. They are going to be supported by the Air Force, the Navy, if there's another asset over top. But I think, our maneuver commanders are going to require that aerial part of their tool bag to do their jobs.
If you want to pipe in on that, otherwise I'll move on to something else.
Let's move on.
Good. So we heard Director Sapp talk about how the various services have war-gamed out fighting without space, and in her words, it got ugly. We know about the threats to space assets, and not just space assets, but other ISR capabilities, all of which feed into PED. I just wonder if you share her confidence that the services are resilient enough to respond if they were to lose those assets, or those assets were to be diminished by adversaries.
So I'll take that.
Maybe first.
I think that's an interesting thing that we've spent the last 15 years in what we call a permissive environment, right? We owned everything from 10,000 feet up.
Yep.
And we're going into potential crisis situations where, with peer and near-peer competitors, where we don't necessarily can be assured of complete control of that airspace and that space generally. So there's a couple of things that have happened. Number one, the Navy which back in the Cold War was actually quite adept, as the other services were in operating in environments where they had to hide themselves from an electronic perspective. And so we're getting back into that over the last 3 years or so, trying to remember and develop that muscle memory on how we do those kind of operations. I am actually, I'm probably, Ms. Sapp is actually pretty smart about these things, so I'm probably going to defer to her judgment. But I think the thing to keep in mind is that while we are incredibly dependent upon space, the Russians and the Chinese are increasingly dependent upon space. And that little event they did in 2007 was a lesson to them as much as it was a warning to us, in that it created a lot of stuff flying around. And the Chinese are building quite an impressive architecture in space, and if they go kinetic, the danger, of course, is that they will create a situation that they will make it difficult for their operations as well. Yeah. So that's why I'm probably with Betty Sapp on this one. So.
Mutually assured destruction for space.
Yeah,
so,
that's sort of the way to think about it, yeah.
Marines?
I think I agree with Ms. Wright as well. We've discussed this at length, and the key advantage that the U.S. would have if those events were to occur is that we can adapt far faster than our adversaries. So throughout our history, we have fought and won conflicts without space, without robust aerial reconnaissance like we have now. We can figure out how to do that again. We just have to ensure that our adversary doesn't maintain that advantage over us, which would be hard to imagine. But I agree with Ms. Sapp. I don't think it would, right now, it doesn't look like it would get quite that bad. But that's why we have to maintain the flexibility to use all data sources, including microsats. It would be very difficult to see how the skies would be swept from the swarm of microsats. That would be hard to imagine. I'm sure it's capable, however, at some point in the future, but not right now. That's why we're looking on, and we're really eager to find a way to leverage all this. And it's going to require changes to our TTPs and our tools, and a cooperative effort like we've seen recently with Joint PED to get there.
We talk a lot about, and I'm just looking at some of the remaining questions we have from the audience. Common topic is just big data and filtering out the noise, getting the most useful information to the people who need it most and can benefit from it most. I just wonder, for the warfighter on the ground, in your experience, is that a danger that they're inundated? You know, they're in the midst of something, and they're getting all this data, and they got to worry about the guy shooting at them, and in addition to trying to prioritize the intelligence that you're bringing to their fingertips, literally. How do they handle that?
There's no question that it's a challenge. In the Air Force, for our fighters, we prioritize the data that we send to them. And so we have permissions in order to put data out on the link, and there are priorities of what's most important and what's least important. And then we like to provide the operator with the ability to declutter. So they have an input of, I don't need this stuff, and deselect it. So I think that those are two tools, but at the same time, we have to be very sensitive to making sure they have the stuff that they need in order, to protect themselves and to achieve the objectives we set for them.
Any others?
Yeah, so I would agree. She did a field training exercise down at 4th Brigade level exercise. It was down in the cavalry squadron talk, and that commander, again, he's got exquisite systems, but he really necked down his commander's critical information requirements. He tailored his tactical operations center to be mobile, small. Now he knew, when he was on a stopper, when he could reach back into the higher level headquarters to get more data, but he and his staff had really necked down what they needed, how they were going to pull it in. So, as an example with DSIGs, there are dozens and dozens of applications that battalion intelligence officer could have used. They're using 4 or 5 applications, the one the commander needs with just the data they need, and they're in that very close tactical fight. They're also, to answer your previous question, they're maintaining an acetate map board with stickies on it behind them, and they have their map books and compasses because they're training to work in that EMS denied environment.
So
while
they're still training that way.
They're still training, and General Milley, our chief's been very clear that that's something that our maneuver commanders are going to train to in our CT Combat Training Center rotation.
Is that true? Because I've read that in the Navy, for instance, they're teaching
Yeah.
folks the sextant again.
Yeah, they're bringing
just
back
in case.
celestial navigation at the Naval Academy. And so this is it's really, which I think is great, because I think it creates a mindset of, it's an intellectual process in order to do that. And so I think that's important. The Navy, just like as George talks about, is also, we're able to drop back to stickies and maps and charts pretty quickly. We've done some testing in terms of just, turning off of the SATCOM when you're at sea. And this goes through the training process we've gone through over the last 3 years is, initially our IT guys, they didn't know how to respond because we had just turned it off and we'd not told them that we had turned it off. And they pushed the OFF button several times thinking that they could reset it. But now we're in the process of teaching them, how to troubleshoot, and then teaching the commander, what do you really need, right? Right now you're getting, X gigabytes of data coming down to you all the time. What is it your real requirement, okay? And getting commanders, at-sea commanders, to think about what is the bandwidth you absolutely need, and then we fight to maintain that absolute bandwidth. And it's really, you can run a battle group off of some very small bandwidth requirements.
I was on a nuclear sub a week or two ago, and one thing, their navigation table is now electronic.
Yeah.
But they did tell me they still have the paper maps in the back, just in case.
This is the big argument between the Navy and NGA, is the NGA desire to get rid of maps and charts and paper and stuff like that, which I understand. I understand. But the Navy, we're old-fashioned. We like our charts.
We just have a few minutes left, so I might ask you, each of you, if I can, to give us that what keeps you up at night problem, maybe a sentence or two each, your most vexing problem in your current role and command, and maybe I'll start with the Marines first this time.
So networks, where we're going with eyesight, is it going to live up to expectations? Can we afford it?
Money. General Franz.
I would say it's support to combat, uninterrupted support to combat operations forward, where we're taking risks by doing PED at Fort Gordon. We can't have the footprint forward. We can't do everything we need to do forward on the ground. But the fact is the network's fragile. As you said, there are threats to the network. So the fact that Fort Gordon is a centerpiece in support of combat operations keeps not just me, but my staff up every night. It's a constant fight to keep that architecture, flowing, the data flowing, very complex. That is the main thing.
General Otto.
What keeps me up is that we have failed to harness technology to reduce the manpower requirements to achieve the same effect. And in our Air Force, certainly within our intelligence corps, our airmen are extremely stressed. And the reality is, under sequestration especially, the nation is asking more of the Air Force than we have people to do it. And so I'm concerned about the long-term impact of that and the ability to be able to retain some exquisite skilled airmen. And so the challenge for the corporations out there is what can you develop from a technology perspective that allows us to achieve the same effects with fewer people? Because I need to invest those people either into growing intelligence mission sets or to relieve the stress on the current force. And our current manpower models simply do not scale with the magnitude of the data challenges that we face. And I've been harping on this for 4 years, and I have not seen enough response in order to see an actual impact in the field.
The first one is just a riff right off of what General Otto just said into your audience, the question from the audience on more data does not equal more intelligence. Data and information is just that until the cognitive domain turns that into actual actionable intelligence. There's a big difference. There's a gap there. We want more data, but we have to turn it into intelligence, and we have a long way to go in this big data world. And the second is just a very blunt statement. We are not prepared as a Department of Defense right now to fight in what we would call that anti-access area denial environment. We're trying, but as Lynn used the word muscle memory, we have to regain a lot of muscles that have atrophied over time because we're just not prepared to fight because of the war we've been in for the last 15 plus years.
Yeah, and
That's
so
the
I'll stipulate to that. My major concern is from the geopolitical standpoint is dealing with a high-end, near-peer competitor in a very fast and rapidly moving battle space where it's going to be extremely difficult to operate. And then that couples with, on the intelligence side, have I provided enough capability, capacity, automation to allow our forward deploy warfighters to be able to execute their mission in that environment. It's an extraordinarily difficult environment. We've been in a very difficult environment over the last 15 years. But the speed and velocity of what will happen in a high-end combat is beyond and at a level that a lot of us have not experienced in a long time.
Sobering. Thanks very much to all of you, Lynn Wright, General Shanahan, General Otto, General Franz, and Peter Devlin. I'm sure the audience appreciates the conversation as well.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.